Welcome to the Keto Edge Summit, where we are dispelling the myths and empowering you to improve your brain and your body through the ketogenic lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. David Jockers, and I have got a really great high-energy guest and an awesome topic. This is Dr. Nasha Winters, and our topic today is the metabolic approach to cancer. We know cancer rates are going through the roof, and we figured out that actually cancer is a metabolic disease, and we're going to jump into that in detail in today's presentation. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Nasha and why I'm so excited to have her on. She is the founder, CEO, and visionary of Optimal Terrain Consulting. She's a nationally board-certified naturopathic doctor, licensed acupuncturist, and a fellow of the American Board of Naturopathic Oncology. She lectures all over the world, training physicians in the application of mistletoe therapy and consulting with researchers on projects involving immune modulation, using mistletoe, hyperthermia, and the ketogenic diet. She lives in Durango, Colorado. Her book, which she co-authored with Jess Higgins Kelly, is The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, which I actually have right here. I've been reading it. I was telling Dr. Winters here how much I'm enjoying it. Definitely one of the best books I've read this year. I'm only like a third of the way through, but just absolutely loving the experience of reading it. So if you're out there, you're listening, definitely a great book to check out. And she's going to really go through some of the foundational things in that book today. So you get a great sneak peek. And so our topic is the metabolic approach to cancer. Dr. Nasha, welcome to the Keto Edge Summit.
Why, thank you. It's fantastic to be here, Dr. Jockers. It's as I was telling you before we started, you're quite a force to be reckoned with in the best way possible, and it's just an honor to be part of your vision of bringing better health to the whole world.
Well, thank you so much. And so I'm jumping into this book, and I know this is a labor of love for you. Yes. But why did you decide to write this book and really come up with that title, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer?
So, gosh, I mean, first of all, I've been on this journey for myself. I think most of us in the healing arts end up here because of our own health or lack thereof experience. So I'm no different than probably you and all of your colleagues and my colleagues out there. But what I started seeing over 25 years of working in environments like nursing homes, working in environments like addiction recovery centers, working in hospital environments, working in all the rotations we did through medical school, on and on and on, is I just kept watching a population of people getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and we kept laying more and more layers of drugs and different things on top of it, and we're just treading water. We're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's huge. And so when I started into private practice, I actually swore I'd never work with cancer patients because I'd been one, and I just wanted that as far out of my worldview as possible. And lo and behold, the first person who came in to the door my first week of private practice was a gentleman in a wheelchair coming to me for pain management. Didn't think much about it, except for when I saw him and realized that part of his brain was really, his parietal lobe was really bulging out. And then it became really evident that what he was actually suffering from was in stages of a glioblastoma multiforme. This is in 2000. I had already been 9 years into my own cancer process at that time and had my own education around stumbling upon Otto Warburg's work in 1991 at my own diagnosis, and was kind of tinkering with it with myself. So the only thing I knew to do for this man who was having unbelievable seizures, unresponsive to pain meds, unresponsible to epileptic drugs, just wanting quality of life with acupuncture on his way out the door, was we put him on a therapeutic ketogenic diet. Now, this is in 2000. There wasn't much information out there. I was basically following the information I'd learned from the docs doing it in the 1920s on kids with epilepsy and doing my best to follow what little bit of information was available. Lo and behold, this gentleman who was weeks away from death, probably days, because his ventricles had closed, and you know what that would mean, Dr. Jockers, in the chiropractic world. But basically, it was an impossibility that he was actually still alive and breathing because he was no longer circulating cerebral spinal fluid. But he lived another 18 months.
Wow. Yep.
Out of a wheelchair, out of diapers, out of pain, back to a normal quality of life, spending quality time with his family, his loved ones. No other therapy is brought in except for acupuncture, a little bit of homeopathy, and frankly, the ketogenic diet. We none of us expected that. Every day that he lived, we're like, oh, that's a miracle. I mean, every single day. So lo and behold, word got out in my small town that this is something I had success with. And I became kind of the cancer whisperer in my community. And now I work with folks, I consult with folks worldwide. Basically, I no longer have my brick and mortar practice in Durango, Colorado. I see folks all over the place, helping them look under the hood to understand their metabolic process, to understand their metabolic potential even. And just as you said, it's before we started this interview, illness is based on what's going on in our mitochondrial metabolic functioning. And if we can go at that core, we can change a lot of situations, a lot of conditions. And this man changed my life and changed that of tens of thousands of patients I've had the privilege of working with ever since.
Yeah, I had that's a great story. And I had a similar experience with a patient, Ryan. So for me, I had skin cancer, and I was able to reverse that with ketogenic diet and lifestyle strategies. And then, my first patient with cancer, with an advanced cancer, came in, Ryan, same type of cancer, stage 4 glioblastoma. And, he lived an extra 2.5 years after he was diagnosed and given 6 weeks to live with ketogenic diet. So, I mean, his family, like for me as a doctor, I'm like, oh, why couldn't he have lived longer? Is what, like, my heart broke when he did get sick and eventually passed. But his family to this day is just so thankful for the extra time they got with him. And, just basically being able to use a nutritional approach. And I know you wrote your book, Metabolic Theory of Cancer. And so what do you mean by metabolic?
What I mean by metabolic is, what is the main fuel source that gets us going, what drives our bodies down the road, if you will. And so it's very fundamental. It's very simple. It's like, what kind of gasoline are you putting into your car? And how efficient and effective is it for you? And that's kind of where it all begins. You can drive a car down the road with bad gas, and you can even throw sugar in the gas tank and sputter along for a little bit, but over time it becomes gummed up, less and less efficient, and finally it just stops altogether. So this metabolic approach is exploring what is gumming up our inner gas tanks, which comes down to these little powerhouse cells known as our mitochondria, and to find out what makes them become better in number and quality and function, and what repairs the ones that are damaged. That's what we explore. And we, Jess, my co-author, Jess Higgins Kelly, and I, she started joining me in practice in 2011 and helped co-facilitate some of my retreats where I'd been using this for a long time and teaching. She came in and talked about the importance of the actual food. And I've been talking about food, but as a naturopathic doctor, I'm also doing their labs and looking at all other things. And I needed someone who could just talk about the fuel source itself. So Jess joined me on this journey, and we started really educating patients in these 4-day intensive retreats to help them understand by testing, assessing, and addressing what was going on in their personal gas tank, and then therefore what we could do to change it, to make it more efficient, more effective. And that's when all the folks started saying, this is so much information, this is so much powerful information, look at what we can change in 4 days. We would have them labs the day before, the week before, and the week after, and they'd see the change. They, of course, would feel the change. So we weren't just making this up. And they were like, you've got to write a book. So it was the push of, patients that were being empowered and inspired and understanding how to better their gas tank functioning, that made this book come to fruition. Yeah.
And so basically you're doing these retreats and helping people understand how they can use fat for fuel, how they can get off the blood sugar roller coaster, right? Balance out, their blood sugar and their ketone levels, and start to improve their mitochondrial function, which is awesome. But I think for a lot of people, just that having that sort of a retreat approach can be just so effective because they're immersed. It's full immersion.
Yeah. And we control everything. It's like, but it's also the support of each other, because a lot of folks will come in very scared, very overwhelmed. And by the end, they've got a team of people that they can rely on, they can connect with, and they can be accountable to and with. It's pretty powerful. And I haven't gotten to do them in over 1.5 years because of getting this book out, and I miss them, and I'm looking forward to going again in 2018.
Yeah, good. That's awesome. Now, in your book, you talk about the Terrain 10. Let's dive into that topic. And so what are the Terrain 10? Let us know more details about that.
Well, thinking about that mitochondria again, that little powerhouse organelle, I liken it to a bucket. Okay. And so there are 10 things that I have seen, 10 patterns I have seen over my 20 some years of practice that seem to contribute to that bucket. Okay. So I see epigenetics. So that blueprint we were handed by our ancestors that has come down several generations. I see our microbiome. So the actual inner soil, what's going on with that. Then I see things like our mental emotional our health. What's been going on there? What kind of traumas, childhood traumas? What type of relationships are you in right now? What type of stressors in your work life? Then of course stress itself, but also more specifically circadian rhythms, how our sleep and waking cycles are working, and how our light cycles are working within our body and being. Then coming down to things like inflammation, immune function, angiogenesis, circulatory processes, what's happening there, hormone balance. I'm missing 2 right now, which my brain, let me just take a peek, make sure I'm not forgetting this. Oh, obviously, stress, like I already talked about the stress hormone chemistry. Toxicants, for crying out loud. What are we being exposed to on this planet? And the most important, which is how this conversation started, is the metabolism, the sugar, the fuel source that's going into that bucket. And so that bucket, we all have a different threshold of what makes our buckets healthy or unhealthy. And, our job as human beings is not to expect somebody else to figure out what's in our bucket for us. It's our job to start exploring that at any time, look inside of it, dump out what shouldn't be there, add in what should be there, and just keep it sort of dynamic and fluid and flowing of really crystal clear water, in that bucket at any given time will absolutely be what helps you prevent illness, deal with the illnesses that they're already on board, and prevent recurrence of those processes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you really dove into all 10 of those things, because there's a lot of people out there, they'll say things, they're on the pro-nutrition camp, but they'll say things like, it's all about what you eat. And you and I know that's not really the case. I mean, what you eat is very important. And I think we emphasize that because it's a conscious choice. It's one of the few conscious choices we have. We can't always control what we're breathing, what we're being exposed to. We can control what we eat. And so it's important, but there's so many other factors that are playing a role. And we've got to really look and do a deep dive assessment on those factors and control what we can. And I always tell clients, you got to pick your poisons. So you need to understand what is toxic, and then, decide if it's worth having that. And, you can only have you can only be exposed to so many toxins before they're going to build up. So do your best to minimize them. And, the certain toxins that you're not ready to give up on, just realize that they're damaging your body. So you need to do other things to really help offset that. And so diving back into the diet approach, I know you and I are both huge fans of the ketogenic diet. Of course, this is the Keto Edge Summit. So tell us more about what the ketogenic diet is and how that really impacts our metabolism and cancer in general.
Perfect. Well, first of all, I do want to point out that a ketogenic diet in the cancer patient is a little bit different than maybe what you'll run across online for, optimal human functioning or athleticism or cardiovascular disease or diabetes. There's a few nuances to any of those categories that you're shooting for, depending on what your end goal is within those populations. But again, you've probably already had people on this summit talk about ketosis or ketogenic diet in general. And basically, it's this alternative fuel source that we were born with. It's been part of our ancestry, part of our evolutionary being, that was a really cool built-in mechanism that says, hey, when food is unavailable, you don't just lay on the ground and cry and die. You've got to be steady. You've got to be clear. You've got to have, you've got to have some inner will and inner fire to be able to function until you can find that next food source for your family to survive. So that is this cool thing that suddenly we're going along, we're burning our carbohydrates and we have an abundance available to us in nature. And then suddenly when we go into the moments where it's covered in snow, there are no berries, there are no nuts and seeds to pull, there's no, you have to really take a lot of energy to go out and find game and whatnot to hunt. Your body would die otherwise. And so suddenly it can make this beautiful little switch like a hybrid car. It can suddenly switch from gasoline to electric, and now you're burning ketones. And that clarity, that wherewithal, that stability, that almost like hawk-like sense of intuition. All these things kind of become hyper clear so that you can do exactly that. Go out and forage and support your family. Let's move forward a few thousand years, and now you don't have to forage much more than a couple feet from your desk or from your couch to where you can go and have access. So basically, we're all in a perpetual summer now. We're all in a perpetual abundance of high carbohydrate foods that are available to us 24/7 every day of the year. I can get a papaya in Durango in December, right? That should not be the case. And so these are the things that have changed. And especially when we started processing flour and whatnot in the 1850s, we went from having about 30% of our diet being carbohydrate in the mid 1800s to today it's 70 to 80% of our diet is carbohydrate. We totally poured a ton of sugar in the gas tank in the last 150 years, and it is not paying off. And so finding ways to take us back to what was a natural state. I hear people talk about, eat low carb. Well, no. Let's eat normal carb is what it's actually called. It's not low. When we talk about this, we're talking normal centric carbohydrate intake when we're talking actually giving it that label of low carb. So it's so weird that we've gotten so far away from that, and that folks like you and I are looked at as the outliers when it's been our ancestors' way of being on this planet since the beginning of time.
Yeah, it's really an ancestral approach because our ancestors didn't always have access to food. So they would have times of feast and famine. When food was plentiful, they didn't have a refrigerator, or, they didn't have a place to store it. So eat as much as you can because you never know when you're going to get your next meal. So they would feast, and then they would have days and, sometimes multiple days, sometimes weeks without food. And actually they got stronger as they fasted. And that's what I've noticed in my own life. It's like, gosh, when I'm fasting, I actually feel great. Like I did a workout today. I was 19 hours fasted, did a workout, and felt awesome, felt absolutely amazing. I wasn't even hungry after that workout. And that's kind of the benefit of changing your metabolism on this approach and being fat adapted. Because years ago, before I understood this, number one, I wouldn't have even gone for a workout without eating. I had to eat my first hour I woke up, and I was usually doing a protein shake or something like that last hour before I went to bed.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's totally shifted, and you don't think about food as much. And when you do eat, you enjoy what you eat well, but your feedings are less often, and you are so much more productive and efficient when you're doing this. Now, you had mentioned how a ketogenic diet, it's going to differ for somebody with cancer. So what's your approach when you've got somebody, let's say a fast growing cancer in their body? How are you using diet and food as medicine there?
Well, first of all, when I'm working with somebody with a cancering process, and even in a newly diagnosed, maybe stage 1 or 2, the thing that I'm seeing out in the world around me, because I see a lot of patients from all over the world who come to me saying, I'm in a ketogenic diet. And I'm like, great, what are your blood ketones? And they look at me like I have 14 eyes. And they're like, what do you mean blood ketones? I check my P strips, or I use my breath, my ketonics. So what they don't understand is that you actually don't know for sure if you're in ketosis without the blood test. That's one of the biggest sort of failures in the oncology world, or any patient really looking to use ketogenic diet therapeutically. So that's one of the things we do right away. If I want them just to kind of be in a place of creating some metabolic flexibility and kind of waking up their mitochondria, I'm going to want them to be more in a state of maybe nutritional ketosis, which is frankly where we should all be after we finish our meal at night and wake up in the morning from a fast of 12 to 16 hours. We should naturally be anywhere from 0.5 to 2 millimolars per liter of ketones in our blood. That is so rare today. Right? It's really rare. I run across a couple of those patients that do that naturally, but it's really, really rare. So when I'm also then working with someone who we're trying to actually use the diet as a chemotherapeutic agent, as a cytoreductive process, I need them in a therapeutic state, which is going to be getting those ketones between 3 and 7. So for instance, really aggressive glioblastomas. right? We want to get them up higher. Now, it's not just about the ketones at that time. Folks like Dr. Thomas Seyfried will tell you that you also have to make sure that the glucose is also coming down. There's this GK index that he talks about, this glucose to ketone index. It's a little bit of a mathematical simple equation, but basically you're trying to get it under 2. To make sure you can force, like taking all the ketone supplements that are out there, you can actually kick up great ketones and it looks great on breath, blood, and urine. But if you're still shooting at a 95 or 105 glucose, you're not really metabolically flexing those cells and making your cancer cells vulnerable. The cancer cells are still sucking up all that glucose. Even if you're in ketones, you're like, oh, cool. Good, there's ketones over here, but look, we've got a buffet over here of glucose, so we can just go after that. So that is one of the big ones that I help people understand right away. And 9 times out of 10, the people who consult with me have never even heard of a blood test for this, which is really startling. So no wonder you see on some of the forums out there, oh, it didn't help my cancer. Oh, it caused my friend to die. Oh, it doesn't work. Well, probably because they weren't actually in ketosis.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And so, you definitely can test other things, but blood testing is the gold standard as far as how it goes. I know The Level is a sponsor, which is kind of basically, and they're kind of creating a better standard when it comes to breath testing. So, we're looking at other options, but for right now, it's definitely testing the blood. And Dr. Thomas Seyfried was another guest on the Keto Edge Summit here, and he kind of goes through that in detail, that glucose keto index. And so definitely check out that interview if you want to know more details about that. But and I find that with cancer, it's super important to keep protein under control as well. Yeah. Oh, and most ketogenic diets, or at least a lot of the meal plans that you'll see on the internet, are moderate and sometimes actually high in protein. And I think it's so important because that protein stimulates the mTOR pathway. And for most people with cancer, especially fast-growing cancers, they already have a hyperactive mTOR pathway. And so we need to shut that down. So kicking that fat up high, getting the protein, the carbs really low, and then applying a lot of fasting. Is that an approach that you use?
So very much, because really, as a naturopathic doctor, our tenets were based on water cure, nature cure, and water fasting was very part of the beginnings of the foundation of medicine that I practice today. And yet what you described earlier was it struck me, because I too, by the time I graduated naturopathic school and started early practice, you were like, make sure you eat within that hour, snack every 2 hours. The reason why that seemed like a good idea is because we were all so metabolically unstable that we lose our when we don't put some food in there every few hours. That is now a clue to me. If someone says, I can't go more than 2 to 4 hours without eating, red flag, metabolically inflexible. We got to do something about this. So we'll do whatever we can to work them slowly into that. And working on an intermittent fasting window, eating restricted eating window is one of the easier strategies to work, because people can kind of go, okay, I can do this. I can do anything for 13, 14, 15, 16 hours, work them up into it, and eventually into longer fasting. Fast forward into folks who are deep into the cancering process and deep into using chemotherapy, we're actually finding that, and I started using Dr. Longo's approach of deep fasting with chemo when he started really presenting his research several years ago. And all of my patients were fighting me tooth and nail. Oh my God, you don't want me to eat for 5 days? I'm like, yeah. Everyone freaked out, but once they did it once and they felt the difference of what it felt like to fast with their chemo versus not, I never had to ask them again. They did it on their own. And most of them continue it today of a once a month, 3 to 5 day water fast, and have gotten so metabolically flexible that they love it. Like you said, it's like they suddenly I have more time. I'm not worried about what I'm going to cook this week. I've got unbelievable energy. You'll just see this shift. And we're restoring ourselves back to a natural state of being. And it's really powerful and empowering to see folks being able to start to feel the difference of when they're integrating that in. And if folks, I hear people talk about this, even in the people kind of fighting against the keto camp for cancer, you ask them the same question of, well, how do you feel about them fasting? And they'll be like, oh, well, that's really good. And I'm like, well, you do understand that when you're fasted, using ketones. There's sort of this weird disconnect. Somehow we've put this weird stigma over the name ketogenic diet. Maybe it's thanks to Atkins and his protein push. Maybe it's thanks to the misnomer of ketoacidosis. Maybe it's thanks to, I don't know. It's just some myths that need to be busted. And I'm really happy you brought up the mTOR protein, because that is key. If I'm not seeing someone really achieve good therapeutic ketosis and a good GKI, it's 9 times out of 10 too much protein.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you, one of the big criticisms is, and I've heard this from other people, they say the ketogenic diet has too many animal products, right? That's what people will say. And they say, well, that's not good for cancer. And I say, you know what? The reality is we actually want a low protein, high fat diet. And in general, it's definitely going to be more plant-based, especially when we're trying to approach cancer or some sort of a chronic disease like that. Because again, we've got to keep that mTOR pathway, and protein stimulates this mTOR pathway, stimulates IGF-1, which for young individuals is healthy because it helps us build muscle and help regenerate tissue. But when you've got a chronic disease, those pathways are so messed up. So we've got to really inhibit those in order, to get us into this state of basically ketosis, or just metabolic ketosis, and in that level that we need to be in order to basically shut down the cancer formation. So yeah, but I've heard that criticism that they're like, ketogenic diet is just a high animal product diet. And I'm like, you know what, there's a lot of people who are using more of a plant-based approach. I know I've got a program that's basically what we emphasize is a plant-based approach to ketosis. So
exactly. And I'm a plant-based ketogenic diet person, because I still absolutely see the importance of the polyphenols, the fiber, the colorful veggies. I love Terry Wall's, she's very much into that 9 cups of vegetables as sort of the base camp. You can definitely use high quantities of low glycemic vegetables and get your micronutrients really dialed in. It's very powerful. And then folks, I really like Dr. Cowan's garden. I don't know if I can talk about companies and whatnot, but I love his powders, because that's another way to get in some vegetable matter in people who aren't, maybe as savvy in the kitchen. It's a great way to add more green things to their diet. And also, just yesterday, I met with a family out of Chennai, India, mom with ovarian cancer, and working with them. They're by culture and design vegetarian, and knowing this woman, very diabetic, fatty liver disease, glucose, insulin, IGF-1, hemoglobin A1C, off the charts. I mean, my God, off the charts. And they're coming to me because they heard me speak that I can help people do this even on a plant-based approach. And so we're just going to do it with a strategy of just bringing in, she hasn't eaten eggs since she was a little girl. She was willing to bring that on board. She really got away from her ghee and was using more sesame oil. I'm like, get back to the ghee, and getting back to these basic things. It was so cool to just be able to realize you really can meet people where they are and bring them along and help them understand. Once they understood that they could reach the same, 75 to 80% of their diet fat, and, 10, 15 to protein and 5 to carbohydrate, they suddenly realized, oh, this doesn't have to be animal on animal on animal on animal. It was a huge eye opener for this whole family, and the whole family is now going to do it with her, which is really cool.
Yeah, that is so awesome. Yeah, I would say the one, in my program, the one animal product that we really emphasize is grass-fed butter or ghee. Absolutely. The conjugated linoleic acid, which is a lot of research on that, helping reduce cancer growth in the body. Also, tons of fat-soluble retinol, vitamin A, you got in there, K2, supportive nutrients for the brain, like phosphatidylcholine. And you know what? It makes your vegetables taste so much better, which is awesome. And no animals had to die either. So if you're a vegan and you've got kind of that sort of ethical approach, then no animals had to die in order to produce that. And it's just so good for the body. Those fat-soluble nutrients, I find a lot of people that are doing plant-based diets for a long period of time are deficient in those.
Very much.
And
her lab showed it. She was low in K2, selenium, zinc, magnesium, vitamin D3, and B12 severely. Her D3 was 9.
Oh my goodness.
That's what I said. Actually, I didn't quite say that. I said something a little more aggressive, but that's just it. She had no ability to take those. She hadn't used good quality fats in so long. So it was a powerful conversation. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I see that a lot in my completely plant-based diet population.
Yeah, absolutely. And so why do you think that conventional oncologists really just are not aware of this?
Gosh, well, you have to remember that less than 25% of all medical schools are even offered an elective course in nutrition.
Yeah.
I mean, it's right there. It's just they don't know. And number two, by the time they get out, just to survive medical school and then survive residency and internship and all those pieces, there's no time to learn. I mean, hell, have you looked? I mean, do you know what I ate through medical school? It was the worst. It was like mochas and bagels. I mean, my God, it was the worst diet ever. That's pretty much, how you go. It's like grab and go crap. It was just that way. So if they're not applying it to themselves, it's hard to apply it to somebody else. And then the industry, the agricultural, the way we push our food plate, our food pyramid, the way we push that, you got to get your 5 servings of grains a day concept has kept us in this brainwashed belief system that you're going to die if you don't have enough carbohydrate, and it's bizarre. I'm always marveling at it, but there is a change happening. A change is a coming. I just was attending a conference with Siegfried and a bunch of these other pioneers in the field of metabolic medicine at co-hosted by Hopkins, for crying out loud, and using the ketogenic diet as a strategy in all areas of cancer and neurological disease, especially Alzheimer's, dementia. So it was really cool to just look around every once in a while and go, wow, this would not have happened a few years ago. And now saying it as a naturopath is one thing, but when somebody comes and says the exact same thing I've just said, and they work at Memorial Sloan Kettering, suddenly people listen. So I don't really care who the messenger is, as long as it's starting to seep out into the community. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I think that's we're hitting a turning point at this point. And I would say for most doctors, I mean, you and I, we're high achievers. And so we've achieved a lot of things throughout the course of our lives. And so being a high achiever, sometimes we take pride in kind of this idea that we know everything. And I think for most doctors, it's hard for them to say, I don't know. That comes from a place of humility. And so if they haven't studied this, they're thinking, I know everything. An oncologist is going to think, I know everything about cancer. That's my specialty. And if nobody's ever come along and trained them in the ketogenic diet and these sorts of nutrition lifestyle approaches, then they're just going to dismiss it because they would think, you know what, if it was really that important, I definitely wouldn't have gotten in my continuing education, or somebody would have come along and taught me this. And, it's just not happening. But now it's starting to change, where you're seeing more and more conventional doctors that are not okay with the results they're getting. They're not okay with seeing unnecessary suffering that's taking place. And they're saying, hey, there's got to be something better. And, conferences and summits like this are really providing that information. People's eyes are being opened. And the doctors that are humble enough to say, you know what, I don't have it all figured out, these are the people that are starting to learn. And I've been saying throughout the summit, this great quote, it says the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who can't read and write. Instead, they're those who can't learn, realize that whatever they learned isn't serving them, decide to unlearn that and relearn new strategies and kind of humble themselves and go along that path. And so I think that's what's happening now. Yeah.
Well, I love that you said that, because I started out in my process with my own cancer. I went staunch vegan for almost 7 years. And then instead of being dogmatic about it, as my body started to fail me in other ways, I was like, well, curiosity took over. Well, why? What's happening? So then I started to explore and moved into vegetarianism, added that on for another 12 or so years. That was much better. I felt like I stepped up a notch. Great. And then I'm still learning. And then as I was, 50 pounds overweight, my thyroid not working, my sleep terrible, my cycles all over the map, like what in the world? I'm eating perfectly, in this realm of 100% organic, gluten-free, good nutrition. But it was this diet that was frankly overnourishing and overfeeding and undernourishing me. Didn't know that until I started digging deeper into my labs. And guess what? My vitamin D was 17. My thyroid was 12.6 at one point in time, because I was going crazy on all the iodine. Yeah, my TSH was like, what is this? All these different things happening. I was having just massive autoimmune reactions left and right, RA, Hashimoto's, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That was after coming out of surviving terminal cancer, right? Suddenly I felt worse dealing with these endocrine autoimmune disruptive processes than I did when I was dealing with my cancer. That's kind of should tell you something, that it made me do exactly of the quote you said. It's like, why isn't this working anymore? I have to dig deeper, and I have to be willing to learn something new and change my trajectory to honor that information. And I had other patients following right with me, and we all changed together, and bless them that they still follow me around from my vegetarian days to being more ketogenic days. It's been really beautiful to watch all of us blossom together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you're listening and you know people in the medical community, definitely share this summit, share this information, share Nasha's book with them, because we've got to get this message out into the medical community without a doubt. And I know you don't just use the plant-based ketogenic diet. What are some other therapies? I know when I was reading your bio, you were talking about mistletoe therapy, and most people know mistletoe as the plant that you kiss under for Christmas. And so now obviously you've kind of helped pioneer this sort of therapy that's gaining more and more traction as the results are coming in.
Yeah, and it's gaining traction. It's already gained traction worldwide for 100 years. It's celebrating its 100th year as a injectable or an adjuvant therapy in cancer patients. So it's not new to cancer. It's not new as an injectable. It's not new around the world. In fact, thousands of studies, 126 or so that are considered good RCT studies, in this country around. But we got lucky in a patient who had an amazing stage 4 colorectal cancer, mets to liver, basically told there's nothing else we can do. She opted to try mistletoe. And that was, I think she just said 8 or 9 years out, because her doctor was Luis Diaz at Johns Hopkins. He's now part of Memorial Sloan Kettering, head of solid tumor there. This guy is stinking brilliant, right? He watched in awe of her process. And the first year he's like, wow, good job. And the next year, well, this is interesting. Third year, what the heck is going on? Finally he got behind helping her create the funding to launch the first trial in this country on mistletoe therapy. And so we're now into almost the first year of that. There's going to be some preliminary studies coming out on this so far, but it's a safety study, and it's been well documented as safe around the world, and they're definitely not finding problems with it here. But it's a therapy that offers so much to my patients as far as supporting their conventional therapies, enhancing their quality of life, bolstering all the side effects that come with those therapies, such as low blood count. It's kind of like nature's Neupogen or Neulasta. It definitely lowers angiogenesis by directly inhibiting vasoendothelial growth factor. It definitely enhances natural killer cells and immune modulates different things. So there's so many mechanisms of action. It's quite powerful that it's used as an adjuvant therapy in cancer all around the world without it's not contraindicated. So it's like when I look at a therapy so inexpensive and so effective that if you live in Europe, you've got about an 80% chance of using this at some point of time in your therapy. Why would this not be made available to all of us to do whatever you can to enhance your outcomes of such a dire diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what other therapies are you using? Anything else?
Yeah. So of course I'm different therapeutic supplements, things like melatonin. Obviously we talked about vitamin D, how that's such an important one. I really love a lot of the different IV therapies. My colleague, Paul Anderson, has got a book coming out. He and Dr. Mark Stengel have a great book coming out in the spring on sort of these out of box therapies specific to cancer that includes things like IV vitamin C, of course, mistletoe, hyperbaric oxygen, hyperthermia, artesunate, which is a derivative of artemisia, both oral and IV, poly-MBA. Oh my gosh, it goes on and on. Low dose naltrexone, I use a lot of that in practice. These are some therapies, again, when I mention these, they're not standalone. I mean, they can be, and they can be very effective as standalone, but they're very much enhancers of any of our conventional cytotoxic therapies. It doesn't have to be an either or. For those who are uncomfortable going completely integrative or completely alternative, this is the way that you can do it and get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and let's say somebody is going through chemotherapy. Okay, we talked about fasting with chemotherapy. So if somebody's saying, hey, you know what, I want to do a combination of both.
Yeah.
What would you tell them? How would you instruct them?
Well, first of all, I don't just say, hey, here's a protocol, do this. I look under the hood first to see, well, why did they get cancer to begin with? What are the patterns? What are their molecular profiles or SNPs? I look at all these other components, as well as just their general state of health at the time I'm talking to them. I mean, are they a 40-year-old robust person, or are they a 75-year-old that's kind of on the edge of things, really, really sick and weak? So I look at the labs first to determine how aggressive we can be or need to be. Okay, so that's one. But typically I am an educator. I take doctor very seriously. Docere in Latin is teacher. And so I really educate them on helping them look inside that bucket, see what's in the bucket of the terrain 10, know exactly what each of those things mean, and know what the typical therapies are that are effective in addressing that particular pattern. And then we look at their conventional therapy, whatever that may be, and look at how they might interact together to make sure it's safe, that they won't cause that pharmaceutical to not be effective or over enhance its effectiveness. That can be a problem too. And then adjust and apply the treatment accordingly. And then the way I approach, I'm looking at labs every month with these patients so I can tweak them as needed. It's not like, oh, you're going to go through 6 months of chemo, get on this therapy and I'll see you after. I never do that. And if people do that, it usually doesn't end well. I like to see them, or at least have them learn how to monitor themselves in the interim to know if they need to change course anywhere along the way. And we have so many cool tests and tools and blood biopsies and things coming out that we can even test now with certain companies to look in our blood to see if even that conventional therapy is even doing a dang thing. Right? So we get a baseline of our circulating tumor cell assay. We can then get halfway through the treatment, take a look at the blood again, see what's going on. Wow, yeah, it's responding great. Keep course. Or nothing's happening here. In fact, it's getting worse. Change course. That's how elegant oncology is becoming, and I know it will become more so in the coming years.
Yeah, it's really moving in a great direction.
Yeah.
And so, who do you see out there as big players doing a lot of research on the metabolic theory of cancer and really pioneering that?
Gosh, there's so many. I become kind of that weird groupie. I mean, it's just, I follow them all around like a little sick puppy dog. But, Angela Poff and D'Agostino, obviously, Seafried's team. I'm really impressed with Dr. Slocum and his work over in Turkey. My colleague I mentioned, Dr. Paul Anderson and Dr. Mark Stengel down in Mark is down in San Diego. Paul is up in Seattle. Those were kind of some that jump out, and those are more the clinicians, but they're also involved in doing a lot of the literature, like reading through a lot of the data. They're milling all the research. And then, of course, Longo's work. We've got some really cool work out of UCLA. We've got some really good work at like Dr. Wicha and Dr. Dean. These guys were kind of pioneers in the mitochondria and the stem cells. They're the people who kind of put cancer stem cells on the map, because just a few years ago, most oncologists denied their existence. And now we understand that these are little cells that break apart from the original tumor site and are non-responsive to conventional interventions, and hence why we see a 70% recurrence in patients who've had an original cancer. This is why. And so now we're finally putting some research into the stem cells and how to approach that. Now, we're spending billions of dollars on that, but I'm here to tell you that the most effective ways to approach those stem cells are from a terrain-centric approach. And some of the most powerful ways are things like intermittent fasting. Simple, right? We're spending all this money and putting people on metformin, and we're like, just fast. It works quite well. Now, great, if you need a pharmaceutical intervention, metformin is showing some promise, but you really can get the same effect, if not better effect, without methylation problems, without damaging the GI tract, without being a mitochondrial poison, to use intermittent fasting instead.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I get that question all the time. People will email me, or they'll come in my clinic and they'll say, I have little to no money at all, but I've got this fast-growing cancer. What do I do? And I say, go get a gallon of water every day, clean filtered water as you can. And that's all. You just drink that, get some good salt, Himalayan sea salt. And you're just going to do salt and water for, the next, sometimes 20, 30 days, right? So I've had people fast over 40 days and see phenomenal results. And it really costs them nothing. In fact, they save money doing it.
Exactly.
And I said, well, the money that you save, put it away, and let's get some vitamin D, so let's get some basic foundation supplements into your system. So your body can start to modulate that immune system. And it's just so powerful what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, it just takes commitment. Obviously, it takes commitment and a different way of thinking. And so if you had cancer, okay, right now, let's say your cancer came back, it was fast growing, what would you do?
Well, right now I'm not in a constant ketosis, so I kind of cycle. So I'd probably go into a deeper, faster state, fasted state for a period of time. And I would likely, just because of the nature of what I know of my tumor process historically, I'm a little like knowing a little too much, I would probably do hyperthermia in conjunction with that in IV mistletoe. That's just my approach now. I'm not anti-chemotherapy or radiation or surgery. I just need to have that out there. Mm-hmm. But I know from what I see, and I know what the literature shows, that there's still only a small percentage that will actually have an actual cure or good remission with those therapies. And I also know the type of cancer that I've had, ovarian cancer, stage 4, is typically not very good under the guise of conventional interventions. So I would not be inclined to go that route. There's nothing out there that impresses me right now in conventional medicines that are provocative enough for me to take that therapy. So I would probably go to Europe, do whole body, local regional hyperthermia, IV mistletoe, and fast. And that's just, and do my kind of nature cure approaches. I'm really into constitutional hydrotherapy, forest bathing, grounding. I mean, anything, just being out and gazing at the sun does a tremendous amount for my system. And that's really simplistic, but man almighty, it's a potent. I mean, I've watched it time again take people that were on their deathbed full circle, it's, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, some of those things, forest bathing, grounding, just getting out barefoot. I mean, my wife and I, we take a barefoot walk with our boys every single day. Like we just try to, even if it's on concrete, grass, whatever it is, just getting connected to the Earth's natural electromagnetic frequencies. The idea of tree hugging, it's
literal now.
Right, exactly. So, it's been mocked for years, but now we actually understand it's a therapy. You're giving yourself, a healing therapy when you go out and you connect with the trees.
And isn't that really what cancer, I mean, any chronic illness, but cancer in particular is so much about the ultimate disconnect. And being the ultimate out of rhythm, out of sync. I mean, nothing's listening, like none of the cells are communicating effectively. Everything is running amok. It's, it's like a kindergarten class on cupcakes. I mean, it's just, out of control. That's what cancer is. And so having the opportunity to reset, restore the rhythm, which mistletoe is, that's anthroposophically what it's known to do, is restoration of rhythm, and to get back into the rhythm of nature by simply walking on wet, dewy grass first thing in the morning to get that early morning light, and getting to bed without staring at your computer screen or your TV after 9 p.m., and all those different things that we just take for granted in our fast moving modern times. We're all being slowly mitochondrially poisoned every day just by living in modern times today.
Yeah, totally. Well, I have loved this interview, Dr. Nasha. You just brought so much great content. I just want to acknowledge you for really pioneering this metabolic approach to cancer, getting it out there. I mean, I know there's a lot of researchers out there like Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who's in this, and Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, but you're out there working with real people and using it and putting it into clinical practice. And you're doing it with passion and with love, and you're helping people all over the world. And you got this awesome book. Again, I just started reading it, but definitely one of the best books already, that I've read this year. And I read a lot. And so I'm loving that. And I think that all the listeners really should get this book, especially, if you want to dive deeper in how to take, especially if you know somebody that's dealing with a chronic disease, or you just want to understand just the metabolic approach and really like she was talking about all the different strategies that are in there. And how to put this all into action. I think you get a ton of value out of it. And they can find this at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, right? Like literally booksellers everywhere. Yeah. And how do they connect more with you, with your website, with the content you're putting out?
Sure. So my co-author, Jess Higgins-Kelly, and I have a Facebook page on the metabolic approach to cancer. So we're always trying to keep relevant information that seems to come up and keep validating, confirming what we talk about in the book. Also where we're doing speaking engagements and book signings and whatnot. Jess also has an amazing consulting practice, Remission Nutrition, very focused in oncology. Does amazing work. She actually lives up in Maine now, but she's also been consulting with the folks at Harvard and other places implementing ketogenic diet for cancer patients. And then I kind of take that bigger picture above and beyond just the nutrition into the rest of what's in the bucket with Optimal Terrain Consulting. And you can find both of our businesses' names on Facebook. You can also follow me at www.optimalterrainconsulting.com for my website. And I believe I'm terrible with this type of stuff, but you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram under the Optimal Terrain.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. It's really been an honor to have you on the Keto Edge Summit. And if you, the listener, have enjoyed this interview, I think you'll get a lot of value out of just taking a look at owning this entire Keto Edge Summit for yourself. That way you'll have lifetime access to this interview, as well as all of our interviews with our experts, all the transcripts, all the bonuses. So that way you can improve your brain and your body and really have that edge in life and be able to be that high performer, reduce your risk of chronic disease, and live your best life through the ketogenic lifestyle. And so if you would consider owning it for yourself, we would be honored and blessed. And we will see you on a future interview.